We are learning so much. All right, folks, let's get started.
Guilty.
Okay. Okay, welcome everyone. My name is Devin Graham, pronouns are she, her, and I am here in Tallahassee, Florida, as Will would say. I'm very excited that y'all are here tonight for this co-sponsored event with Humanists of Tallahassee, Freethinkers Forum, as well as American Atheists. And tonight's talk is about the humanism of Star Trek. And our speaker here is Sarah Ray. Sarah is a transgender activist and podcast producer and one of my dearest friends. I'm so glad to say. She's also the president of the Humanist Society. So if you are interested in becoming a secular chaplain, she's the one. She's the one you talk to. So a little bit of background on Sarah. She was the co-director and founder of the atheist community of Polk County here in Florida, in which ACPC was a true force of nature in the deepest, reddest part of Florida. They planned everything from food pantries to school backpack lunch programs to meal deliveries during the lockdown to highway cleanups. They just did it all, and ACPC was, and Sarah specifically, was the inspiration for what we are trying to do with the Humanist of Tallahassee. So I thank her for that. So she also hosted a video a video show. I sound old. Okay, a, a YouTube show, along with myself and Allie Ashmead. It was called Freethought in Florida. It was every Friday night, and it was just us getting a little bit wasted and just talking about what a mess Florida was from a secular standpoint. Sadly, both she and Allie fled for Florida separately, and somehow they both ended up in Colorado. So their love of Star Trek and their passion for humanism and secular advocacy was the basis of the Humanist Trek podcast. And I will drop their links in the chat momentarily, as well as their Patreon. So please support artists. I highly encourage that. So Sarah, I'm going to hand this over to you.
Well,
And,
thanks. You've
and
been
if you could all stay muted during the talk, that would be great. We're going to do Q&A at the end. So, all right, thank you.
thanks. You told my whole story, so now I have nothing else to say. I am from a very, very small town in the Midwest originally, from Illinois. Very small town, 1,400 people, high school graduating class of 32. So when I say small, I mean small. And church on every street corner kind of place. And I went to church. I was raised in the church. And then at some point, I decided is the wrong word. I realized that I had to deal with my gender transition and the feelings that I was having. And so that sent me into that journey. And while I was dealing with all of that, we started a podcast in 2015, my wife and I, about the transition journey. And so we talked about what it was like to go to the therapy appointments and what this doctor was like and what that doctor was like, and going to work and saying, hey, here's the thing that is about to happen that you need to figure out how to handle and figure it out quickly. And that show turned very quickly into eventually part as the transition path. You get to the point where you just put your bra on one boob at a time like everybody else and go to work. And so there's nothing exciting to talk about. You kind of, I've made it, and now what? And the now what was, well, let's talk about stories that are happening to the LGBTQ community. And as you know, so many of those stories are, here's another example of religion shitting on the queer community. And so that really launched my secular activism. And like Devin said, we started the local community there in Florida. And I will tell you that that is something that I deeply, deeply miss. It's not needed as much out here, interestingly. But so that community organizing stuff was really like checking boxes for me and giving me fulfillment. And that's something that I definitely miss. We did this show on YouTube where we talked about all the terrible things going on. And one night, Allie gets on and says, Sarah, I don't know how to tell you this. I'm moving to Colorado. And I said, oh, no shit, I'm moving to Colorado too. And independent of each other, we ended up like 30 minutes away out here. So we thought, well, we should still do media. We should still do some kind of fun project. But things aren't as bad in Colorado, so there's not as much to talk about. And also, it was just a lot of doom and gloom. And eventually, like my own mental health was, that was just too much. And so we needed some fun project. And that's where Humanist Trek was born, both being Star Trek fans and understanding a little bit about the history of Star Trek. We thought we'd do a Star Trek podcast, and so that's led to all kinds of different things. We appear at conventions, we do live shows, we do panels like this, often at the nerd conventions. So let me see if I can make this work again. Excellent. So, assuming that you all are very familiar with humanism, just very briefly, the definition from the American Humanist Association is that humanism is a progressive philosophy of life without theism or other supernatural beliefs, affirms our ability and responsibility to lead ethical lives of personal fulfillment that aspire to the greater good. And I included that in here tonight, knowing that most of you are familiar with the concept, because one of the neat things about our show is that we really have two completely different audiences that have a very small Venn diagram overlap, and that is people who know humanism, who may or may not know Star Trek, and people who have been watching Star Trek their whole lives, built their value systems on the Star Trek values, and have no idea that it's called humanism. So there's two very different audiences that we work with, and we find that this is a really great way to introduce people to the idea that this is what you've been getting all along was the humanist values. Gene Roddenberry was a humanist. Um, he was featured here in the Humanist magazine. He received the 1991 Humanist Arts Award from the American Humanist Association for Star Trek's exploration of humanist values. And people who were in his orbit at the time, that particularly when he was really studying and learning and diving into humanism. Susan Sackett is a name you might have heard before. She was his assistant at some point in the Star Trek legacy, and so she used to do talks like this, and has written a book, and she's got some really great insights onto kind of who Gene was. So of course, how we explore this in Star Trek, um, we decided, because we're crazy people, we decided to go all the way back to the original, very first pilot, The Cage, in Star Trek: The Original Series, and work our way through the catalog, episode by episode, talking about this is the humanism that we're supposed to be learning and looking for in this episode, or these are the big questions that really make us think and challenge our humanity. And with that, we've had to kind of put a filter on that we're in the 1960s, sexism is rampant, and that's just, it's a creation of its time. But despite all of that, there were some really forward-thinking humanism in the original series too. And of course, once you get into the next generation, you see Gene's his beliefs start to be able to be seen a little easier because he didn't have the network oversight and demands that he did during the original series run. And so one of those big ideas that comes from Star Trek that went all the way back to the 60s is this Vulcan idea of infinite diversity and infinite combinations. And that's the idea that we're all different, but when we put our humanity, our species together, and focus on the things, build from the things that make us the same, the things that we have in common as the platform to build on, and then our diversity is the color inside the lines that makes humanity this beautiful thing that it is. And that when we work together, each of us with our own strengths and our own backgrounds and our own beliefs, and we come together, that humans can do great things. Or Vulcans in this case. So we like to talk about, and if you've seen any version of this presentation before, every time we do it, it changes because we're working our way through the catalog, and so as we see things, we'll pull an episode out and throw a new one in and kind of update it. But we like to go through and just talk about some of the episodes that really stood out and what we were kind of thinking about and chewing on, and what were those questions. And so this first one here, Dagger of the Mind. Kirk investigates an experimental facility for holding prisoners and finds a sinister scheme. And we discovered that this scheme was to experiment with mind control to subdue prisoners, and that this rehab for the criminally insane idea that was then again explored in Whom Gods Destroyed. And so the idea here is the people who were put into these penal colonies, these rehabilitation facilities, were the people that we would probably still put to death today, right? The most heinous crimes that you could imagine. But in the Star Trek future, they think maybe there's a different way to approach this. And so here we send them to these rehabilitation colonies where they set in a chair with a device on them that zaps their brain and makes them subdued. Really, it makes them more compliant. And that leads to all sorts of ethical questions, right? Um, are we forcing these people into this rehab program? If you've broken the worst of our covenants, of our laws, this is the punishment, and you don't get a choice. And how do we feel about that? What happens if an offender refuses treatment? What do we do with them there? It still doesn't really solve all the problems, but it's an interesting question, because for us, when we look at the so-called justice system here in America, um, our approach is throw them away, throw people away. Um, there's very little being done to try to rehabilitate or any kind of effort to bring people back into society with any kind of recovery or skills that they will need to re-enter society in a meaningful and productive way. If you break a law, we just lock you away and forget about you. And that's a terrible idea. And so it's neat to see that Star Trek is thinking about, like, well, what could some other possibilities look like? What are some other systems that would rehabilitate people instead of just removing them from view, so that the rest of us can go on with our lives and not have to think about them? There's a push now, of course, to make prisons private and for profit, which is terrible and creates crime as a motivator, because these prisons want to stay in business and turn profits for their investors in the fourth quarter, right? Which is just a terrible idea. Another one that, if you're not a Star Trek fan, you might probably have seen some of or know, the Horta from The Devil in the Dark. This is an episode where the Enterprise is sent to a mining colony, being terrorized by a mysterious monster, and we find out that the situation is not quite that simple. So the Horta, these are beings who, to these people, appear to be very different. They are silicone-based life forms, uh, not carbon-based. But we eventually learned that they have more in common than they previously thought. And through this commonality, there is a proposal to coexist. Gene himself said about this episode, the audience can put themselves in the place of the Horta to feel what they must feel. If you can learn to feel for a Horta, you may also be learning to understand and feel for other humans of different colors, ways, and beliefs. And so this episode was so much about, here is a different species, here is a different people that look and act and think completely differently from us, until they learn that the Horta is a mama and she's just trying to protect her babies. And therein we find the human connection. Now, This episode also, unfortunately, had a solution that wasn't so clean. The solution here was, so the Horda are these big pizza creatures that bore holes through the rock, and they, leave behind the minerals that the miners are trying to collect. And so the solution here was, well, the Horda can dig the holes and the humans can collect the ore. Everybody's happy. Except that this is really colonizer centered. The Starfleet is on this planet and shouldn't be. It's not their house, it's the Horda's. And so maybe we should have just apologized for the intrusion and left the Horda alone on their planet. So again, they don't get everything right all the time, but it's really making an effort to really poke at some things and make people question. And sometimes Star Trek hid the social commentary and humanist themes inside the cake of sci-fi, and sometimes they just put it right out on the table for everybody to see. As was the case in Let That Be Your Last Battlefield. This is an episode that explores racism and bias, and this was the one where the people were divided by this one is black on this side and white on the other, and I'm white on this side and black on the other. And how can you not say this is about race in America any more clearly? But here they are, these two different people that again have more in common than they have difference, that hate each other because of this difference. And in this episode, Kirk particularly really goes through an effort to try to get them to see that this is just this one thing that's different about you, and there's so much more in common. One that not a lot of people watched was Star Trek the Animated Series. So after the original series went off the air, this fever dream of a show became reality, and the animated series is a lot of fun. We didn't really remember. I grew up as a TNG kid, so I'm a Next Generation Star Trek fan, and then I got into the older stuff later. Allie started with the original series, like watching with her mother, but I don't think either of us had ever really spent some time with the animated series, and so reviewing that was a lot of fun. So again, this idea that humans have far more in common with each other than different. And if we can center those shared values and experiences, maybe that's how we build towards this bright Star Trek future where we've overcome greed and selfishness and biases. And all of that, of course, is part of the human condition. But Star Trek suggests that the way to get there is to come together over what we have in common. And in the time trap, this episode, the Enterprise falls into a pocket in the fabric of space and time, whatever that is. We had Dr. Aaron McDonald, who is the one of the science advisors to the Star Trek Industrial Complex, came on our show to review this episode with us, specifically because she's interested in gravitational waves, and so this episode really spoke to her, and that was fun. But they find themselves inside this pocket among a very diverse group of aliens who, outside of this pocket, many are enemies. Klingons and Romulans and humans and Vulcans, and they don't all get along normally. But here in this particular place, where they sort of had no choice but to learn to function together, and they've learned to live together. And while this episode is more about the Enterprise making nice with some Klingons, they connect their ships to escape this pocket. They connect their ships together as if it's two different alien starships have standardized parts, and they make their way out of the hole, and we go back to normal and hating each other. But the real story to me is thinking about what would it take for humans to come to this place of agreement. If you were to put me with someone who, say, I don't know, is the political opposite of myself, where we might not have a conversation in normal daily life, and we're locked together for with no escape, no known way to get out, we're probably going to fight for a while. And that happens here in this episode. But then eventually, when you come to realize this is just how the rest of existence is going to be, the two of us together stuck in this space, we have to figure out a way to learn to live together. And so that's easy to conceive of when you're talking about two people locked in a closet who have to figure out how to get along, and much more complex, of course, when we're talking about an entire planet full of people. But this episode really shows a kind of alternate reality where John Lennon's imagination has come true. And it shows us some hope for humanity. And I have for a long time also spoken very confidently about this ability to set aside our differences and learn to live together based on what we have in common. But I have tempered that optimism a bit since, I don't know, 2015. Immediately following this episode is an episode that shows a completely different approach called the ambergris element. This is one where Kirk and Spock visit a planet where there are air breathers and water breathers, and the two do not like each other. And the water breathers do some magic on Kirk and Spock, and they grow gills and flippers, and they go down and meet the underwater people. And here we have a society whose young people have very different ideas about how their society should move forward, where the older generations are more set in their ways and tradition. And so that very reflective of humanity for sure, and a cycle that we go through with every generation. The end of this episode, they make the opposite decision. They don't find their common beliefs and build from there. The end of this episode, the young people decide to go live somewhere else. And that really makes me think about, I often make this, it's a sort of tongue-in-cheek joke, that if they want the swamp ass South so badly, then we'll just give it to them. Everybody gets a one-time move ticket, and anybody in the North who wants to live in the South, we trade houses with somebody who's stuck in the South who wants to escape to the North. We get everybody where they want to be, and then we build a wall on the Mason-Dixon line, and I'll help pay for it. And that's a fun joke, and I like to say it, and it makes me smile. But that's not going to work, right? The idea that we can't sort of mitosis ourselves apart because we're such a global species now, with the communication that we have to figure out how to coexist, how to function together. And even if we were able to do my silly little joke, then we'd be neighbors. We'd be Hatfields and McCoys with a picket fence between us, and we would still struggle with a lot of the same issues that we struggle with now. Then we get into Star Trek: The Next Generation, and this was the series that I grew up loving. And another one that a lot of people know, whether you know Trek or not, is the first season. Catastrophe is not the right word. Justice is an episode where Gene Roddenberry was also really, really horny. And that showed in a lot of his work too. So here we visit one more paradise planet, because we're always going to paradise planets. And in this one, young Wesley falls into a planter, and the punishment here is death. It's a very clean system. We only have a few of these zones. They change every day, but if you cross the white barrier, time to die. And it's kept the peace for a long, long time. The setup here is we visited another planet, and that planet's people did not provide a copy of their laws, so ignorance should be a justifiable defense. But what this question of justice does make me think about are things like, stealing food from a massive multi-billion-dollar grocery store chain to provide for your family. And where's the line? Is it okay to do it in a hurricane? We would consider any crime a theft, any theft a crime, but the real crime should be that we simply aren't providing food for everyone, which we could do tonight if not for our greedy, selfish, capitalist hellscape of a society. We could solve it tonight. Hunger and homelessness could be gone. Eat one rich, right? But the real injustice is that we don't provide health care, that we don't provide medical, dental, mental, and vision as a right. Not that Luigi got radicalized by dealing with a greedy health insurance system. What's the real injustice? This question in this episode really reflects on a lot of things that are going on today. We're not providing housing or jobs as a right to all people. What's the injustice? And in this case in particular, um, they have these laws and don't provide a copy in advance. And so, they were they were caught off guard by the punishment. Every now and then, Star Trek pokes a little bit at the God question. We've seen what does God need with a starship? There were some great episodes in the original series that inspected the idea of gods. And this episode, Who Watches the Watchers, is, I think, one of the best because here we have a Bronze Age civilization, and they seem to have moved beyond some old beliefs. Their ancestors had some ideas about supernatural and gods and that sort of thing, but by this point in their evolution, they seem to have been pretty well past it, although they're familiar with the stories. The Enterprise shows up, and prophecy fulfilled, the gods have arrived. And this happens in the form of one of these aliens being injured. There was a team of scientists studying them from behind a holographic curtain, and that system went down. The Enterprise was there to fix it, and they got found out. And so one of these people had to be beamed up to the ship to be healed, and unfortunately woke up during the medical procedure, saw Picard in his glowy view, and decided God must be Picard. Picard is our God. And they try to wipe his short-term memory, which is not a real thing, but Star Trek. But he definitely remembers when he gets back down to the planet. And so there's a whole transformation of this society suddenly, that the old myths and gods of their ancestors, they must be real. Those stories must have been true. To make matters worse, some of the crew then go undercover on the planet. They glue some ears and forehead ridges or whatever to their heads, and off they go. And they try to talk these people out of this God belief, but it's really, really strong. So strong that in the end, Picard himself has to beam down and allow these people to shoot him through the chest with an arrow to prove his mortality. And this is something that Star Trek has suggested several times. The idea that maybe what ancient people believed were gods were actually aliens. This is when I would play the Ancient Aliens theme song. An original series episode suggested this for the Greek gods, that maybe our pantheon was actually a group of alien visitors who just stopped off on Earth for a holiday. And that's all fun sci-fi thought, but it also, I think, is a really great demonstration of how a human population in its infancy of development can be easily fooled into believing in all kinds of supernatural claims. These people didn't have the technology to test and inspect and really figure it out for themselves. It took killing Picard, killing their god, to prove to them. This is one that I saved sort of towards the end, because uh, not to end on a downer, but so that if discussions of suicide, death with dignity, that sort of thing, if those are topics that you need to avoid for your own mental health, please look us up at humanisttrek.com. Follow us on the socials. Happy to have you here. Thank you so much. This is the episode where Loaxana Troy falls in love with this alien man. And in their culture, it is their deal to end their lives when they turn 60. And of course, this cultural difference is extremely hard for Loaxana, who's just now fallen in love with this man. And guess whose birthday it is? Loaxana says to Picard, trying to get him to violate the Prime Directive and refuse to let this guy end his life. When a person on this benighted little planet reaches the age of 60, which Timison is about to do, they're expected to simply kill themselves. Did you know that? So this is a topic that, and again, we save this to the last because this is one of the things that I found most interesting on this rewatch. Some of the things that we're seeing from when you put your humanist glasses on and you're taking notes and looking for things specifically, you see all kinds of things that you didn't see the last 4,326 times that you watched through the series from beginning to end. One of them was how racist McCoy was to Spock. Now, they played it off like this is just a workplace friendship and they joke around with each other and it's all okay. But saying you green-blooded, pointed-eared hobgoblin is not at all different. Very, very similar to saying you black-skinned such and such. He was a racist with a capital R, and something I had never noticed before because it was played for this friendship thing. But now I can't not see it. And there was a moment where they actually kind of pushed back on it, and Kirk was like, you need to calm down with all of this. But it was never really resolved. This episode really, again, the first however many times I'd seen it, it was an interesting episode. It was entertaining. I thought it was great, but it didn't really sink in what we were talking about. And so one thing I want to be clear about when we talk about this is that suicide and death with dignity are very, very different. And the official position of the Humanist Trek podcast is suicide prevention is important. Mental health care is health care and should be a right provided freely to all. Sarah's Star Trek future is that anyone who needs help should be able to walk into a clinic and say, I need help, and get that help regardless of your ability to pay, your insurance, your citizenship, period. But this episode really made me think about life and death. And one of the things that as we do this talk, I keep refining sort of how I approach or how I talk about this, because it's taken quite a while to really kind of hone in on exactly how I'm feeling. And I think of suicide as a shocking, abrupt end to existence, where death with dignity, which we used to call assisted suicide, leaves space for some humanity. There's room for goodbyes. How often have we lost a loved one or in whatever way and still carry some sort of guilt that we didn't get to say goodbye? We didn't have that last conversation. There was no final I love you. And so death with dignity kind of gives you the ability to do that, to get together with loved ones and go out on a high note and have one last party and say the things that you've always wanted to say. But what might that look like? So as someone who has experienced passive suicidal thinking for a large part of my life, For me, the suicide prevention piece is very much about in the moment. Although, it usually takes, it's a series of downers that kind of got me to that point. One, thank you, sir, at the store, as well intentioned as it might be, could easily be the final straw, particularly for someone living the trans experience. So we try to help people through that moment, right? At our last talk that we did in Fort Collins, somebody in the audience mentioned suicide being a permanent solution to a temporary problem, and that we don't have to have a permanent solution in that moment, right? The solution can be temporary. Here's how we get to the next moment. Here's how we get to the next step. It doesn't have to be this is this is the thing that's going to solve all my problems and make my depression and anxiety go away, right? What can we do right now in this moment? And I'll yes and that, especially again, having watched this episode in a new light, I started to wonder, who says that living is preferable to not living? And while it may be true for you, must it be true for everyone? If you're ready to clock out, who am I to tell you that you can't or shouldn't? And if there were a more humanist approach to death and dying, would more people choose it over the shocking end, the abrupt, shocking end of suicide? Essentially, being a human on the planet in 2025 is really hard for a lot of people. And I'd like to have the framework to both help you through that moment, if that's what you need, or help you into the escape pod, if that's what you need. So then, if the guardrails of death with, it's the guardrails of death with dignity that become important. Are there waiting periods? What does that process look like? And I think we're finally starting able to make progress in this area. You remember Jack Kevorkian? In my little small town, Jack Kevorkian was a weirdo, and we thought he was kind of strange, and he was talking some crazy things. But it turns out he was way ahead of his time, as was Star Trek in this episode, as usual. So, Death with Dignity allows us a unique opportunity to get in a room together with our loved ones, relish memories, have those meaningful conversations, say our goodbyes, and then in whatever gathering of loved ones or not that you may choose, a peaceful release can come. Now, all of that said, that's not exactly the framework of this episode, right? Here, Lwaxana Troy falls head over heels in love with this alien whose culture just happens to do the 60 years old is the cutoff. And the reasoning for this is what I found very interesting. On this planet, people don't want an aging population to become a burden on the youth and society in general. So we start losing our physical and mental health. Many times people end up in long-term nursing homes, hospice towards the end, which is miserable. And this really resonated for me. The 60's a little low for my own liking, but I absolutely don't want to become a burden on my children. And of course, elder care, whether we're doing it well or not, is really freaking expensive. Money that my kids could be using to pay down their mortgages or grow their businesses, invest for the future, do the creative things that fulfill them. All of those sound preferable to me over keeping me propped up in a chair in a nursing home like Weekend at Bernie's waiting for the end. And I think I quite like the approach of this alien race. Let me go out on a high note. The idea is that you're still well, and your children's memories of you will be of you in this way, and not the suffering and pain that often comes towards the end. Let my family remember me when I'm well, and take my own burden away from society. Now, of course, I completely recognize that as I age, that will change. My ideas of whether this is great idea for me or not are going to change, and that is something that I recognize. But it's something that I wanted to make sure that we talked about and document, and so that we can look back on this and think, well, what was Sarah thinking back then? But this episode just completely shook my view of suicide from it's terrible and should never happen to making the decision abruptly as terrible. And we should work to improve the situations that cause those urges. But if it's a carefully thought out decision and you're ready to punch the clock, who am I to tell you that you shouldn't? And that is primarily my prepared episodes to talk about. But I would love to use the rest of our time in some conversation and taking some questions. And I think Jamie is going to lead us in that.
Hey, that sounds great. Thank you so much, Sarah, for that presentation. That was beautiful. I'm a longtime fan. Also a fellow small towner.
Okay.
Grew up graduating high school class of 28, or 29 if you count the one that got kicked out for drunkenness.
Mm.
So
I had one that didn't make it too.
So everyone, we'd like to open up the floor for questions. What I'd like everyone to do, if you're okay with this, is to use the raise hand option in the toolbar at the bottom. And if you'll do that, everybody will queue up, and we should be able to get some questions in.
I'm just now seeing your questions in chat too, or your comments in chat too. Those are great.
Oh yeah, yeah. We've got one hand raised. Oh, do we? Yes. Carly in Denver. Go ahead and unmute and ask your question.
In Denver?
Yeah.
You're right around the corner.
Well, yay. Yeah, thanks. I'm thrilled for this. I hope my question is pertinent insofar as I'm planning on attending the town hall with Hickenlooper and Wiseman tonight. And I want to ask on behalf of humanists and like-minded, value-oriented people that value community and whatnot, what we can ask of our political representatives on a local level and maybe on a national level or global level that might help promote the values of we're all in this together. Do you have any particular sort of questions that I might pose for them or put my own words or whatnot to help promote the values of humanism that I value so greatly?
Yeah, I think so much of the purported values of religion seem to overlap. And so while you will most certainly find religious people who have completely left I grew up in the Christian church, and the shit they're doing now is not what I was taught. Those were not the values that I was taught.
Same.
And so when particularly if you're in a room with a lawmaker or a leader who does come from a faith tradition, I think that would be my common ground. We come from different traditions, but here are the values that I think we can all agree, whether you wear the humanist badge or something else, compassion and empathy and altruism and all of these things that we look to as the values that move us forward. That's where I would probably start. Unfortunately, I also feel like right now we're in such a time where, I'm not seeing the opposition that needs to be seen happening in Washington right now. There is not enough speaking up. There is not enough walking out. There is not enough. It feels like we've spent all of these years talking about this is the end of democracy. This is the end of democracy. And then the boy who cried wolf. And here we are. I don't know how helpful that is, but if anybody else has thoughts, I'm happy with some conversation too of how you go about addressing sharing those values and getting them to be centered in American politics. Isaiah.
Anybody? Isaiah? Oh, you're muted, Isaiah. If you would, I can unmute you, so you'll need to unmute yourself. There's should be a. Oh, you got it. Good. Oh no, wait, it's back again.
There we go.
Hey, can you guys hear me?
Yes,
Yeah.
we can hear you now. Thank you.
Okay, I live in Florida. I live in Florida. I think I live in sorry. I live in Tallahassee. I live in Florida. So the question was, how do we communicate that to our representatives? Do you want my honest opinion?
That's all we would. Yeah, that's all we could ask for. Go ahead.
I'm on the spectrum, and people like people know that we give honest answers. I don't really know how you can. I mean, how do I communicate humanism to Ron DeSantis? I don't think he cares.
Hmm.
He's just I just think that they're just people in this world that are just horrible, and no matter they will not, like, there's just people who are just so hardwired into what they believe in that they'll just never accept anything different. And I don't think we can really reach those people, in my honest opinion. Um,
What
I
do you think of the approaches that Gandhi and Martin Luther King took of nonviolent protest? Do you think that is, there's any potential in that in the modern day?
I'm not too familiar with Gandhi necessarily. I
Mm.
am more familiar with MLK for
Hmm.
obvious reasons, but not
Sure, sure.
that was a joke. That was a joke.
I
I know
gotcha. I
I know
gotcha.
about Gandhi. I just don't know as much as I do about MLK.
Sure, yeah.
Well, I mean, well, MLK got assassinated, so he was preaching nonviolence, but then he ended up getting shot.
Hmm.
I mean,
Was it for nothing?
it wasn't for nothing, but well, it's like when we think of, because we just had Black History Month last month, and then we had
Mm.
and then we just had his birthday in January, and I'm just like, okay, people like to think, oh, okay, he did that speech in DC, and that was the day racism in it, but then they don't want to read what his critiques of capitalism.
Mm.
They don't want to read his critiques on the Vietnam War. That they don't want to read his critiques on the Southern capitalist class trying to oppress poor white folks into hating black folks. That's the
Hmm.
whole thing about Lyndon Johnson's, convince the lowest white guy he's better than the high. So, his legacy lives on, but people don't honor it. It's like we've gotten worse. Like King talked about militarism. Look at our
Hmm.
world now.
Mhm.
How many billions of dollars did we send Israel, right? So like I just feel like people don't really listen to the message. They just want to hear this guy talk about, oh, it's
Sound bites. Yeah.
yeah, sound bites. It's kind of the same thing with MLK and Franklin and Billy Graham, because
Hmm.
they're both Baptists. But see, MLK, I think literally, actually talked, sorry, I'm having, I can't,
It's fine. Is it Isaiah or Isaiah?
Isaiah.
Isaiah would Isaiah really appreciate your comments. I know you feel they may not have been as effective as you wanted them to, but they really resonate with me.
Yeah, it's like, like Billy Graham had his view of Christianity that was different than King's. Like Billy's was like, we gotta convert and that's not what King wanted. So
Hmm.
I think like it's not impossible, but I just feel like Dr. King's words have been watered down so much, and
That's quite possible. Yeah,
people just want to just hear like, oh, he gave that speech and I can marry a white person now and everything's fine, and it's just like that's not that, like like we kind of went it's like King was shot in 68. We had the drug war in the 70s. And then, we had, and then in the 80s, we had, the explosion of the prison system, which culminated into, three strikes, like he
It's a
got murdered,
culmination of many things. You're right. Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
And it's almost like he was murdered so they could do all this stuff because he's not there to call it out, call out the bullshit. So I
Yeah.
just like, I don't know. Like, do people actually want to know what Dr. King wants to talk about? Or do they just want
Yeah.
to hear that, oh, he made the speech about racism and, about I can talk to people of different colors. I mean, people, yeah,
There's an interesting parallel that's kind of occurring to me here between MLK and Jesus. Among the Christians, Jesus started off as sort of the democratizer of holiness. He was saying everyone has God in them, and then of course he gets crucified,
yeah.
and they sort of put him up on a pedestal. And now he's the Son of God, but he's the only one. And
I
no,
know.
none of us are. And I think maybe MLK's fallen into that same sort of pedestalization, where
Well,
people are unwilling to take on the principles that he extolled, but in the end, they just look at him as sort of a representation of that, and they don't actually take it
yeah.
upon themselves to represent it.
And I'll add this part on before we move on to someone else. I never really even believed the whole story of him dying for our sins. I don't believe that. I think if Jesus actually existed,
Hmm.
I think that he said something the Roman government didn't like,
Hmm.
and they killed him.
Yeah, I have my doubts too, by the way.
Yeah, and I
Yeah,
think over time, politicians, kings, and all that stuff looked at the Bible and they removed that to then say he died for our sins.
yeah.
Now, why do you
And
say
then and nowadays you get Republicans standing up and
right?
quoting MLK as if he
Why,
represented them.
yeah, but why would they say why do they say that? Why do they say
Yeah,
that? They say
because they're powerful words, I assume. But
well, yeah, and they also say that to absolve guilt from themselves.
mm, mm,
They want to remove their own responsibility, for helping citizens and put it all on the individual. So
yeah,
when they say he died for your sins, it's your sins, my
yeah,
sins, not the leader's sins, mine. So
yeah.
it's
And I apologize, Isaiah. I didn't mean to bring Jesus into it. It was just a
no, no,
strange
no, no.
parallel that
Well,
occurred to me.
I'm an atheist. I'm an atheist.
Sorry, Sarah. We've gone off on a
Well,
tangent.
No, you're good.
I'm an atheist. I know there are
And
black
so am
atheists
I.
that do exist. We're not unicorns,
Yeah.
but no.
Isaiah, something you said just struck me and made me think of sort of maybe a distillation of the original question, which is whether we're talking about race, differences
Mm,
in values and religions. The distillation of the question that Carly asked is very much, how do we get selfish people to care about others?
yeah. Yeah.
And
Well,
that's hard.
we kind of live under we live under capitalism, so I guess
Right.
well you don't well I don't know if capitalism was supposed to be inherently greedy because if the basic definition is free enterprise, this what we're living in now didn't have to be this way. It
Hmm.
could have still had like you could have still had a society that was more egalitarian, more or less egalitarian, and still capitalist.
I
It,
have to
it,
leave in a moment, so I'm going to clarify my question one more time because I think it's become a little bit clearer. Isaiah, by the way, thanks for all your insights. You're right. I think a lot
you're
of us
welcome.
on here probably agree with that too. That's great. My question is, what words might I use to ask about things that are value-based without being trigger words to people of particular faiths? Where I am, if people hear that I'm an atheist, that is very often a trigger word to shut me down without ever having anything to do with what I say. So as a humanist, I like to put forward the values of humanism, but I want to hold my politicians' feet to the fire about separation of church and state and taking care of the people that need it and giving, no money to private prisons, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm trying to wonder if maybe we can, and not right now immediately, but at some time come up with ways to find language that resonates in our particular culture or area or town or what have you, that may be different from place to place,
Mm.
that we can
Mm,
actually talk with people more on this values driven space of we are all humans and we all deserve to be treated well like humans, no
yeah.
matter race, creed, color, ethnicity, social status, etc. So that's my biggest question. I am going to log off to get onto that town hall now. But you all be well, and thanks again for being here. This is great. I'll see you again.
Thank you, Carly.
Make
Thank
sure
you,
you share.
Carly.
So because people are getting arrested now at town halls all of a sudden. So
Mm. Somebody else had their hand up and they disappeared. I am so sorry if you. I think it was McPherson, and I'm not sure if they're here, but if they're, yeah, I guess they're gone. So sorry. Who else would like to have a question? Sarah, I've got a question for you.
Okay.
You mentioned at the beginning, the definition of humanism, and it includes the reference to the greater good. And I was curious, how you define greater good, and is it necessary to have consensus on what that means for humanism to succeed?
Yeah, that's a tough one because I
Big
find that when I
softball.
talk, yeah, thanks. Well, I find that when I talk to people about humanism, people who've not necessarily been exposed to it before, their assumption is that human above all else is our worldview. And of course, humanism has evolved to include environmentalism and animal rights and all kinds of other things that are not just humans at any cost, right? And I think if the value, yeah, my dog wants to say hi. If the value is on life, and then that extends outward from humanity to other kinds of life, I think that makes sense. On the consensus, I often tell people too, like the definition from the American Humanist Society and the poorly named manifesto has a lot of things in it, like that people would disagree with. One of them that I don't know that any of us would disagree with is the God question. There are folks out there who call themselves Christian humanists or religious humanists or whatnot, and I think the difference there is you're connecting with the values. I'm living by the values of humanism. Although I believe in this God, so you're not a good Christian because you're doing Christianity bad. But right. And so do those people do they get to call themselves humanist? Who are the gatekeepers for how humanist is humanist enough, right? And this is something that I see that we deal with a lot in the work that I do for the Humanist Society. I'll go on a tangent for that for a minute. So the Humanist Society is an adjunct of the AHA, and what we do is endorse the quote unquote clergy of the humanist religion, right? So humanism has been accepted by the government as a religion. My organization holds a distinction in its 501c3 that we are recognized as a church. It started out as a Quaker movement, and then morphed into the humanist society that it is today. It used to be the Humanist Society of Friends to parallel the Society of Friends. And then when it joined with the AHA as an adjunct, they decided to drop the of Friends and just be the Humanist Society. But that doesn't really tell you what we do. What might tell you what we do better is we're the Society for Humanist Professionals. And so we endorse celebrants who are recognized all over the U.S. for conducting marriages, solemnizing marriages. We have chaplains who are working in all of the roles that chaplains work in, prisons and hospitals, and we're working on the military. Military has been kind of the holdout on letting us in.
Go figure.
Yeah, but we're working on it. We have a lay leader program that we're in the process of developing more now. But the idea is to provide resources to local group leaders, chapters, and affiliates, and that sort of thing. To have some sort of training program that you could go through if you're wanting to start a group, or you just joined the board and you want to have a better understanding. So that's something we're starting to build. That used to be the military option, was the lay leader endorsement. And then we have invocators, which you're probably all very familiar with, folks that go to the city council meeting and give secular invocations. And so those are the sort of four main endorsements that we do. And there's different levels of each one. We just created a pathway for folks who may be chaplains, who may have been Christian chaplains for years, but are starting to doubt and walk away and are exploring humanism as an option, so that they can stay endorsed, so that they can be endorsed by the national board, to be board certified, to have the jobs that they have while they explore humanism to see if it's a right fit for them. And so just describing that new approach tells you that, we're really trying not to be gatekeepers of what humanists are and how humanist you have to be able to hold this distinction. We're looking in most cases for a solid understanding of humanism, and if you've got some demonstrated history of doing those things. When I did my interview to become a celebrant before I joined the board, I talked a lot about the work that I did with the atheist community in Polk County, and how we were using our values to help people in need, and I had been performing invocations already at that point. If you Google me, you will find the what was that little town's name, Devin? I forgot. I did an invocation.
I can't remember.
I know, in this little
bad.
town in Polk County, and 3 of the city commissioners got up and walked out on me. One of them, the Jewish member of the group, left a Bible on the dais in protest of my words that were, "Hey, you were all elected because of whatever knowledge and experience you have that brings you to this role, and we're all just trying to do the best for our city and the people that live in it, and now let's go to work." And that was so offensive that 3 walked out on me. And so the idea is that we're just looking for an understanding of humanism and its values, and how you employ them to create a ceremony. It's not just weddings, right? We do memorial services. There are a lot of folks who do end of life service too, as someone is knowing that they are at their end, to be with them and work with them, and help them transition through that end period.
I wonder.
Um,
I wonder if the.
Okay.
I didn't mean to interrupt,
no, go ahead.
No, I was saying I wonder if they left the Bible and they walked out because they knew how, because like they knew you were telling the truth, and all of them were. I kind of think that that's an admission of guilt right there.
They were
Good point.
definitely communicating to the citizens in their city that they were on their side.
Because everyone
Virtue signaling.
Because everyone who says they have God, they're doing God's will. They do some of the most ungodly shit. So I was just wondering because like they'll put the Ten Commandments, in the front of the courtroom, and then they'll break all 10 of them in that same day. They'll lie.
That's a good point, Isaiah. That's a good point. So Jessica, I think, had her hand up. Let's move on to some other questions here. Jessica, do you have a second to share your question or comment with us? You're muted right now, just to be sure.
Sure.
Okay, good.
I
Cool.
was trying to figure, like, I see this lower hand icon, and I'm like, where's
Yeah.
the microphone? So what caught me really was the lady that popped on, and then she had to go. So I am Christian, and I feel very disappointed in what I have seen in people who call themselves Christians in the past few years. And there is a distinct difference between Christianity and Christian nationalism. Christianity is love God, love others. And I'm seeing a whole lot that does not follow that principle.
Yeah.
So that's very disheartening. But I don't have the answer tonight. I do try to talk to fellow Christians and say, this is not, you're not following what's been set out. Like this is not, try to as gently as possible. And again, I can't say, oh, well, these are the words that we should use because I'm not having a whole lot of luck. But if there is an opportunity for me to get with any of you all at any point and try to come up with some way, because I see what's happening to my country and I'm not happy with it. But I would be more than happy to, at some point, figure out how do we get together and, figure out what words to use. Is there anything? Is there anything that can convince them? I don't know. And I have a good friend, by the way, that is atheist, and he, in character, is one of the most Christian people I know. So anyway, but I just wanted to kind of throw that out.
I'll add to Jessica on that point too, because I agree with Jessica on that. Like I'm an atheist, but I think I do some of the most godly things out there. I don't really.
Hold on, Isaiah.
Oh, I'm sorry. I don't
No,
wanna-
no, 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 no. I was just kidding. No, it's fine. I was just joking around. But yeah, I see. I know what you're saying though. That makes good sense. Mark, you have your hand up next, I think.
Yes, I have a question for Sarah. Can
Yes.
you comment on humanism and the series that came after The Next Generation?
Yeah, Star Trek's done some interesting takes, huh? Star Trek The Next Generation follows in the footsteps of the original series, and it's very bright future that humanity is working towards and will achieve. And then Deep Space Nine is a darker show, and it is a little more real and a little more gritty, and the lines are blurrier and things are more difficult to sort of figure out where the ethical lines lie. And I think there's a point where the creator and the creation detach. I worked at Disney World for a decade, and that's something that I definitely saw between the Disney company when Walt and Roy still had their hands on it, and the Disney Corporation that has now become this uncontrollable beast of a capitalist machine, right? And yes, Walt had those dreams, but some of the same things happened with Star Trek as Gene was less and less involved and had in the 60s there was not a change to the script that did not cross his desk, and he was very controlling over what was said and how it was said and who said it, because he had this very specific vision that he was trying to produce. And so then I think when you get into like Deep Space Nine and Voyager and Enterprise and all of the new Trek series, now you have different people who have different ideas. And I think that they've all done, with some exception, they've all done very well in keeping to Gene's kind of core value set and ideas. But Deep Space Nine really explores how does our humanism function when things are not as easy, when the lines aren't as clear, when it's not completely black and white. We are in our rewatch for the podcast. We just started The Next Generation season 1, and so which is a chore to get through some of those. But I'm interested to get to Deep Space Nine because it wasn't my favorite series, and that may be part of it. The idea that it was different, it was darker, it wasn't as clean cut, and I am now really second guessing myself because initially I would have said, Star Trek to that point had been episodic, and sometime in like season 3. Deep Space Nine decided we're going to go to more of a serialized format and tell long stories that arc across multiple episodes. And I like my conflict solution resolution to be in one 40-minute episode, right? So I like my Star Trek episodic. Next Generation did it great because there were character arcs that would carry over long spans of episodes, and the characters would grow and develop, and when you get to do 60 episodes a season, that works out. But Deep Space Nine was just different, and so I'm going to be interested to go back to that and have to watch it. Every time I've tried to rewatch it, I just get to that certain point where I'm like, Dominion War, I'm out, not really interesting to me. But now I'm going to have to do it and see how that goes. But I think I think the parallel is as it goes to the humanism in Star Trek and the values. Um, the original series was never really great at giving the answer to the problem. They would set up difficult solutions and then leave you to think about it. Were the Aquans, the young Aquans, going off to start their own civilization and the old ones staying behind? Was that the right thing to do? Is that something that's applicable to our lives in some way? Those just being able to ask those questions happens in Deep Space Nine as well, and that but it's a little more of a gray area, and I think those are going to be the more interesting conversations when we get to it, because of those conversations. It's Tuvix in Voyager, right? Two people get joined together in a crazy malfunction, and now Janeway has to decide: do those two people as one, is that a new being, and what are the ethics of separating them back into the two people that I know? Is this new being, does it have rights? Does it have the ability to choose for itself? And that's Deep Space Nine has a lot of those types of gray area questions. Voyagers just has the one that everybody knows, because Tuvix.
Well, I shall be looking forward to your commentary on the podcast.
Well, thanks.
Thank you, Mark. Tony, you're next up.
Two things. First of all, Jamie and I participate in a group on Wednesday mornings, and we each got a Bible. So Sarah, if you want a Bible, let me know what address to send it to, and I'll send it to you. The other question is to follow up on what Jessica mentioned about the Christian nationalists. And I'm wondering if the humanist groups and some of the other groups are considering what happens if the Christian nationalists do make their influence a lot more evident in the Congress, in Washington, and take away the tax. What do you call it? The 5.3. I forgot what it is.
The tax exemption, yeah.
Yeah.
Take away the tax exemption from you guys.
That's a serious concern, absolutely. And I know a lot of the work that I'm doing as the president of the Humanist Society is to clarify the distance and the relationship that we have with the American Humanist Association. Because while we are all affiliated, we are an adjunct of the AHA. We do have our own board of directors, we have our own incorporation and bylaws, and we are a separate entity. And I am working very hard to maintain that separation, because knowing that the AHA and its 501c4, the political arm, are pushing. They are going to be getting more out in front of these issues and being vocal about church-state separation in a way I don't think they have before. And so, yeah, we don't want the target on our backs of, oh, we're not really a religion, so come after us. That's something we definitely have to work to avoid. And, longstanding court precedent be damned, because they will happily overturn all of it.
Yeah.
Cool. Yeah.
So you don't want the Bible.
I have 2 copies. So my wife, Becca, is a former Jehovah's Witness, and she saved 2 of her Bibles, and I don't remember what they're called. There's each one has a special name based on when it came out. And what's interesting about these 2 Bibles is that you could flip the pages open and find shit missing in the new one that was in the old one.
Ooh, okay.
And so her mother, still being a Jehovah's Witness, that's often a tactic that she tries to use. Well, it used to say this, and then the old men in power deleted it and printed this. How do you explain that, Mom?
Well, I'm sure that they were guided by the hand of God.
Oh, yes. Oh, I'm sure. Yeah.
So, Carrie, you had a question, I think. You had your hand up.
Well, hi. As a matter of fact, I have several comments. I'll try and be quick. First of all, Sarah, as a Trekkie and a humanist, I just adored this concept. I've been hanging on every word. And, you know, I knew all the episodes that you mentioned, and it's really fun. And to be more serious, I totally agree with the conclusions you have come to about assisted suicide and death with dignity. And I thought I'd mention that our Freethought Society, that we are sharing this program thanks to the generosity of Humanists of Tallahassee, we recently had we discussed two videos. One was a death with dignity, and the other is the right to die. Now, these cases concerned cancer patients who were really suffering and in a lot of pain. And in a faraway country, they include more reasons like chronic intractable depression or bipolar disorder, but I can't remember the country. Anyway, it's just fascinating. Yes, it's just a fascinating question, and we're behind you on that. And I think I had something else, but it escapes me right now. But this discussion is wonderful. So thank you.
Thank you, Carrie. It's a great comments. I'm probably going to mispronounce your name, Akshat. I think you had your hand up, and then Isaiah would be next after you.
Yeah, that's pronounced correctly. Thank you. Or AK, whatever's easier.
AK.
I had a question in regards to this concept of the spore drive in Star Trek Discovery, and how like it signifies this connection of everything from the point of singularity. Maybe if you had any other ideas or concepts of that particular show, and how it responds to the topic of humanism. Thanks.
Yeah, Star Trek Discovery is another one of those that that takes a very different approach to Star Trek. Notably, it wasn't my favorite either. Probably for a lot of those same reasons, and also that it was very much the Michael Burnham show. It was much less about, you know, Star Trek as a family, and Deep Space Nine we were talking about earlier is a show all about family. And so when there are bridge officers that we don't ever learn who they are, that's not a Star Trek to me. But the idea of humanism being explored in Discovery is really interesting in that I think, spoiler alerts for those of you who haven't seen it, but when they jump forward into an unknown future, that puts them in the position of being the different. That normally Star Trek visits places where the people are different, and in this series, the people who become the people who are different are our crew, and now they're in a new place with new ideas and new ways of doing things, and they have to learn to adapt into that, to fit, to see if they can fit, if that's even a possibility, because it's such a unique situation. There's a lot of episodes too where in Discovery, you know, we're visiting strange new planets and strange new people, and we're looking at, you know, the human condition, right? The interaction between two peoples who hate each other. That's my favorite Star Trek, is when we go to a planet and these two people hate each other and we have to try to get them to the table and talk it out.
Cool. Carrie, did you have a follow-up, or did you just not lower your hand yet? I'm sorry.
I remembered my question.
Oh, good.
My
Yes.
last comment. I was fascinated by the ethics of AI intelligence described in when Data has a daughter, remember?
Yes.
And I was wondering Sarah, have you thoughts on the sentience of artificial intelligence and their ethical rights?
Yeah. The Next Generation poked at that quite a bit. We just released or just finished recording or editing something. I don't know. It's somewhere in the process where we were discussing this idea of it was Data lore, I think, where we meet Data's brother.
Mm-hmm.
and we had a conversation about, about robots and AI. And there was an episode recently where Data and Jordy are hanging out, just hanging out in the bachelor pad, and Data is painting. And the question is, does the android create, or does Data GPT just use the information that it's absorbed from everyone else to replicate something others created? Is that a new creation? Do we consider that a new creation if we consider Data to be an autonomous sentient being?
Hmm.
Yeah, I
It
think a
does
lot
kind of,
about. Oh, go ahead.
I was gonna say, it does kind of open up the question of personhood versus human. You may not be
There's a
human, but are you a person?
there's a great episode of Star Trek: The Next Generation where that
Mm.
went literally to trial. Is Data a
Mhm.
person with
I remember
rights?
that one, yeah.
Yeah, sure.
I think a lot too about my dear friend Monica Miller, who is with the Non-Human Rights Project, and they advocate for human rights for non-human animals. There was a case; they have been a mix of successes. There was a case recently here in Colorado about elephants at the Colorado Springs Zoo, I think. What's that called? Cheyenne Mountain Zoo, I believe. Um,
Oh.
and the New York case is probably the one that got the most attention. Lucky, who was not so lucky. Lucky was brought to the Bronx Zoo with sibling animals who were named Dopey, Sleepy, Doc. That was the shtick. And Happy was not happy at all. And so those questions of, are zoos even ethical? And that's a question we poke out at Star Trek a lot too, because the very first episode is The Cage, where Captain Pike is put in a cage. And how do we feel about captivity? And is what we learn as scientifically minded people, what we learn from keeping animals in captivity, does that offset their rights as autonomous thinking individuals who should have the freedom to choose whether they live in that cage or not?
Yeah, deep
That went
stuff.
all over the place.
Deep stuff, but you went in good places, though. Isaiah, you've been very patient. You had another question or a comment?
I have a question. But first, speaking of what just got you with the starship, here's my
Yes.
Nice.
I have the shirt on.
Awesome.
Legit.
Yeah. What about ethics? Because that kind of because there's ethics with Worf, which also kind of like piggybacks on the enemy from I think it was season 3 in TNG, where there was like the discussion of bodily autonomy. Like should Worf give an organ to this Romulan, knowing the history between Romulans and Klingons?
Mhm.
So that's bodily autonomy. But what about ethics? The Klingon episode, because as someone who is autistic, although I wouldn't call myself disabled necessarily, I have to kind of agree with Worf on that. Like he like Klingons are they like Klingons they want to be active and on their feet. They don't want to be invalids. So like if it was me, I wouldn't, because like that's his culture though. I understand like I would understand Worf's position of wanting to, I don't know what the ceremony was called. My Klingon is a bit rusty, but like I wouldn't have a problem if he wanted to off himself if he feels like if he felt like he couldn't, I guess, fulfill his roles as a Klingon. I mean, I'm not a Klingon, so I can't meet I like I'm a human being, and people in our culture, suicide is bad, mostly for other reasons that have nothing to do with bodily autonomy, mostly, religion and whatnot. But like I'm not a Klingon, but even I understand like, yeah, but Klingons, they want to like they don't like being invalids necessarily. So like my human butt would be like, I mean, if this is what he wants to do, why why are we trying to like, like, yes, our views on suicide and assisted suicide are more progressive and in the 23rd century versus the 20th, in which the contemporary show came out. But I still felt like Riker giving Worf shit about it was still kind of that like, oh well, us humans, we
Societal pressures on top of bodily
yeah,
autonomy. Yeah, I see what you
yeah,
mean. There's the greater good, as Sarah was referencing in the, what is the greater good, and how does that conflict with our personal good? Our own personal selfish good.
right,
That's a
I
very
think
good point, Isaiah.
I
yeah,
think your point about Riker there, this is that human idea that tendency that we have to go, no, you don't want to die. Right. And what I'm really saying is, I don't want you to die.
Yes, yes.
Right.
Mhm.
So in this case, is Riker trying to say, I don't want you to die? Or like, is he doing that thing that we do that's like, well, you can't be a warrior like that anymore, but you could be a warrior this other way, just hang in there, buddy.
yeah.
Hmm.
And I think the more progressive approach, the idea that I'm starting to really kind of fall in love with is, well, let's talk it out, man. And if you're just sure, then fine. I will gladly help you with the ritual.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I agree.
Let's take one more question. Um, Looks like we're reaching the end here, I think, unless I'm not exactly sure how long we were going to go, but I think this is
Until
probably a good
Devin
point.
tells me to stop talking.
I'm not sure that would ever happen. I certainly would not want to.
Not cause and effect, but the Outcast before we wrap up, because I think that's when we missed the Outcast.
Mm-hmm.
If I don't know how everyone's thoughts about the Outcast, that one.
Can you elaborate on that a bit about what you mean?
The Outcast from TNG, it came out in 1992. It's the gay episode, quote unquote.
I see.
Yeah, so right, basically they go to this planet where there's no gender, and
I see.
has anyone seen it?
Oh
Sarah, you got
yeah.
any?
Oh
I'm sure
yeah.
you've seen it. I'm sure you got opinions
Yeah.
on that one.
Yeah.
I guess
Yep.
I take the silence as like that's not that we don't bring that up here because that's
Well, I mean, everybody's
Oh
muted too,
no.
and I think they're all a bit reluctant to unmute, but I know Sarah may have some comments on it, so we'll
Yeah.
see what she has to say.
Okay.
You know what's really funny is I didn't really start to address my gender incongruence until like puberty. Well, that's when I noticed it. I didn't start to address it until 20s, late 20s, early 30s. And so like a lot of trans people will tell you that they remember watching Deep Space Nine, and Dax is just such a meaningful character to them because it's the symbiont that lives inside you, and it's this idea that the symbiont can go from person to person, and so it has all of these past lives and memories of being a man in this generation and a woman in the next, and seeing that as a kind of allegory for the trans experience. I never picked up on it. That didn't click to me at all. It wasn't a thing that even registered on my brain.
Yeah.
And this one too, right? So this is an androgynous race of people with no gender, not something that I ever, would have connected. I should have connected with, but didn't. There's also another episode that we recently did. That's the episode with the binars, 11001001.
Yeah.
And one of the things, this was great because I should have caught it because I'm the trans person on the show.
binary.
I should have caught this, but Allie's the one that did. Well, I guess we each get a point for this one, but these beings come onto the Enterprise, and right away Riker is like, "Oh, hey there, fellas," and the commander who's bringing them aboard to do these computer upgrades says, "Oh no, they don't have a male and female. They're non-binary." But so the non-binary I got, but they're binary non-binaries. And so he says they're neither male nor female, Commander. And then the what I missed 15 minutes later in the episode, Riker misgenders them. And again, they're in the holodeck, and Riker's just whipped up his real doll fantasy woman, and he turns to the binars and he's like, "Hell yeah, fellas! Like, wait, attaboy, you gentlemen do great work." And again, that one I should have caught and I didn't. Allie caught that one.
Wow.
But yeah, like when you consider that in my childhood, in my experience, as I was dealing with these thoughts, my role models were the jokes on the Jerry Springer show. I didn't know my wife was a man or whatever, like
Right.
we didn't have positive role models.
Yeah.
And yet we kind of did in Star Trek, and screw Riker for messing it up. But
Jonathan Frakes.
There's a quote from Gene Roddenberry that we play in our intro that says, like, his whole point was, we can't talk about these things on primetime television. But if we talk about them in the context of purple polka dotted people on a faraway planet who have, latex glued to their head, now we can talk about it. Now it sneaks through, and the censors aren't all up in arms, and we can have these conversations. And that's what sci-fi does, in general, but Star Trek does probably better than most or others. Is sneak those conversations through under the guise of sci-fi. And they were doing it in the 60s, they were doing it in the 80s and the 90s, and there must be some small, like, subconscious piece of me that picked up on this. It's not doesn't think about it, in those terms. But certainly, whether specifically those episodes or not, the idea that it's okay to be different definitely came from my Star Trek upbringing. The values that I have as a person, and I'm one of those people that, I grew up loving Star Trek and loving the values that it was teaching us and presenting, and ways to solve these problems using those values, and didn't learn until long time later that it had a name, and it's humanism, and there's a whole world of people out there who align with these beliefs. That all came later, but I learned it from Sesame Street, Reading Rainbow, and Star Trek, right?
Right on, right on. It's a beautiful thing.
Star Trek was so ahead of its time.
It sure was.
Ahead of its time. It still is.
Yep.
Yeah,
Oh, yeah.
good point. Good point, Isaiah. Well,
I have
guys.
another very quick comment.
Yes, go Carrie. Go Carrie.
The Renwicks have a cat named Dax after Judson and Dax. That episode.
Oh,
that's
I
funny.
love it.
All right. I think we're going to, on that note, end the podcast and the YouTubes and the radio show, whatever we're calling this now. Let's give Sarah another round of applause for sharing all her knowledge on Star Trek and humanism. And I'm also very I saw a couple of Vulcan thingies. I'm glad that we had some really great questions and whatnot, because my question for Sarah usually is, what season does Yoda pop up in? So never goes over well. But I'm gonna do a few shout outs before we leave. I'm gonna put in the chat here links for our co-hosts. So American Atheists, you can check them out there. Our convention is April 17th through 20th, always Easter weekend. I wonder why, but it's also a double Easter, so it's Easter and Orthodox Easter, so it's going to be extra blasphemous there. So it's going to be in Minneapolis, so please check that out. I know most of you are well aware of the Freethinkers Forum, but I'm going to put the link to their meetup also in the chat every Wednesday at 7 p.m. Pardon my dog sneezing over there. Every Wednesday at 7 p.m. Eastern. You can check them out on the meetup for the link. The next presentation will be More Than One Universe, ? And it's looking at the multiverse, which is a documentary. And finally, Humanist of Tallahassee. I am just going to throw our link tree in because we have far too many links. So look at the link tree and you can check us out there. With that, I will send everyone an email with the link to this video if you would like to rewatch it over and over and over again in the coming days, as well as links to everything that I've thrown in the chat. And with that, I bid you all adieu. Is there a Star Trek goodbye I'm supposed to say?
Diftor hec smusma.
That's it.
Right.
Long and prosper.
Live
Live
well and
long and
prosper.
I remember
Great program.
the Vulcan phrase from the motion picture when the priestess is telling Spock to go chase the cloud creature. I don't remember what it was. Like
Oh boy.
Peshmo, Pesh. I don't know.
Yeah. Good try, Isaiah. Better than I could have done.
All right. Thanks, everyone. Have a
Thanks,
good
everybody.
Bye.
Great evening.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.